Welcome, survivors, seekers, and thrivers. I'm your host, Shari Lee Roberts, psychic medium, energy healer, and living proof that you can transform your pain into power. Each episode, we dive into trauma healing, developing your intuitive gifts, and reclaiming your life. Get ready for real stories, deep wisdom, and a little laughter along the way.
From my guest, Barb Nangle. Barb is a boundaries coach and author, speaker, and a podcast host. Welcome, Barb. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited for this conversation and to see where it goes.
Yes. Okay. Hold on. You are really inspiring, having taken control and recovered from substance abuse and overeating, resulting in losing over 100 pounds. Bravo. What did you figure? What is the point? Or is that
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go back to 2015 when I was 52 years old. I hit what I call a codependent bottom. And just in case people aren't familiar with the term codependent, welcome to the club. I wasn't either. Even though I had been in therapy since I was about 15, so it's like 37 years, not continuous therapy, but almost. I had read a gajillion self-help books and done workshops and workbooks and seminars and retreats and spiritual groups and blah, blah, blah. And yet I'd never heard this word. So here's what happened. I had volunteered through church to serve to co-lead a project serving homeless people. And right around that same time, this homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner. And he and I became pretty close. And I remember thinking it was like, oh, like God had brought me this homeless person so that I could really understand the plight of homeless people from the point of view of a homeless person. And he was actually very helpful in that regard. And I thought, well, this is so that I can learn to serve homeless people as opposed to, quote, the homeless. And 2 or 3 months into my friendship with him, we had a really big snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And so I invited Dan to stay at my home, which I now know it's not normal to invite a homeless person to stay at your home. And I did that because he never stayed in homeless shelters, but in a really big snowstorm, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
And I knew he hated, I mean, I'm sure there's nobody who likes staying in homeless shelters, but so he did stay. And then another time and another time. And then in a few weeks, he was practically living with me and I still felt trapped in the home. And he was an admitted alcoholic and drug addict. I look back now and I think maybe he had personality disorder too, because he messed with my head in a way I had never experienced. So
Oh,
I'm in
wow.
therapy one day, and in the middle of a sentence, I'm talking to my therapist and I go, "Oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al Anon?" And my therapist was like, "Yes." So just in case people aren't familiar with Al Anon, it's a 12-step recovery program for the loved ones of alcoholics. So if you're not familiar with 12-step recovery, you've probably heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. So Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA, was the first 12-step recovery program created in the 1930s in the United States. And it was the first time in history that droves and droves and droves of alcoholics got and stayed sober, and it was documented. Well, the very next 12-step recovery program that was created was Al-Anon. So now there's some 200 and something for all kinds of things like addiction and other things like codependence, et cetera. But the reason that the loved ones of an alcoholic need a program of recovery is because alcoholism is actually a family disease. We tend to think of the drinking behavior of the alcoholic as that's the problem. It's actually like the pinnacle of it's the tip of the iceberg of the problem. And so what happens with loved ones of alcoholics is we tend to dive in and try to take control of the alcoholic and their behavior and get them to stop drinking, to go to rehab, to go to detox, to go to meetings, etc. And we become very controlling of them and tend to be so focused on them that neglect ourselves entirely. And meanwhile, the alcoholic is starting to feel controlled for some reason. And then they get resentful, and then they use that resentment as like more fuel to continue the drinking. And then the loved one gets resentful of the alcoholic because they're not doing what they want them to do, and la, 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 la. So I had heard of Al-Anon, and I went home to Google, Sherry, and whatever I put into Google, the word codependent came up. And I was like, wait, what is this term? How come I've never heard of it? So there is a 12-step recovery program called Codependence Anonymous, or CODA for short. And I started going to that, and I very quickly felt a sense of relief. And I think it was because, you know, understanding that there's this thing that describes me that I never knew, like pulled all these things together, and that there was a program of recovery. I'm not the only one like it, all that stuff. And I also really quickly after that remember saying to someone, I think I need to be reparented. But I don't know where that term came from. I think I thought I made it up. And then 6 weeks into going to CODA, I went up to Cape Cod, Massachusetts to visit some dear friends, one of whom had been in AA for over 10 years. And she, over the years, had just raved about how utterly transformed her life had been as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I said, you're going to love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous. And she said, well, that's great. Let's see if we can find a CODA meeting here while you're here, and we'll go. Well, she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I had known of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. But it never occurred to me that I would qualify for that program. It never occurred to me why they would need a program of recovery. And I went to the meeting and I learned it's actually adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. Now for that, I qualified. And in the opening readings, they said, we reparent ourselves. And I was like, wait, what? And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. Now, my friend Heidi tells me that I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that. But I bought the literature, came home to New Haven, Connecticut, started going to ACA. About 3 weeks later, a women's ACA meeting started. I still go to that meeting. And then a few weeks after that, I got together with 3 other women and decided to work through the 12-step workbook in ACA. And I just couldn't believe, like, that I was reading the literature and I'm going like, oh my God, this is what happened. This is what happened. I didn't know something, quote, happened to me. And what I now know is ACA is a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recovery. So I went along doing that for like a year. And after about a year, I decided to let go of CODA because I was just going to the meeting and nothing else. Whereas ACA, I dove in. I was going to a couple meetings at work. I was doing the reading outside. And that turned out to be a higher powered moment for me because I was going to CODA on Monday nights, and one of my friends and my step group had begun talking about her relationship with food. And I remember just being aghast. And it wasn't being aghast at what she was doing and thinking about food. It was that she was talking about it, because I didn't know that anybody else had the same kind of relationship with food as I did. Then she started going to Overeaters Anonymous, which is another 12-step recovery program. And she kind of gently tried to get me to go with her. And I went to a workshop with her one day, and I was like, oh my God, I am a compulsive overeater, which I didn't even know was a thing. And when I was at this workshop, they handed me a meeting list, and lo and behold, in downtown New Haven, there's a Monday night OA meeting, and my Monday nights just became available. So I joined Overeaters Anonymous. So I've been in that program for 10 years. And in that program, it's called being abstinent, which is like the equivalent of being sober in AA. So I've been abstinent for over 10 years, and I've been at my goal weight for over 8 years. I'm down over 100 pounds. I don't know the exact weight because I don't know my top weight. The top weight I saw on the scale was 247. I don't know if I weighed 30 pounds more than that, 50 pounds. I really don't know, but I know that was not my top weight. And so my goal weight, I picked 147 was within the range of healthy. And I was like, I'm picking that weight because then I'll know that I'm down over 100 pounds. And I think, for me, the way that I think about all that personal development work I did before Recovery Fairy is that it scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery lifted it. So for me, the 12 steps of recovery are where it's at. So I was working at Yale University at the time that all this went down. And I was astonished at the ripple effect of my recovery on my team. And I think it really was primarily building healthy boundaries, which is essentially the antidote to codependence, which is really my core wound. Well, actually, my core wound is trauma, but the main manifestation of that is codependence, which is why I overate and I drank abusively until my early 40s and smoked weed for decades and secretly smoked cigarettes for like 20 years and stuff like that. So it's all a result of intergenerational family dysfunction and childhood trauma, but I didn't know any of that. And so I was shocked at like the ripple effect of my boundaries on my team, et cetera. And then a couple years into my recovery, I got laid off from Yale. And I found my way into the world of innovation, startups, and entrepreneurship at Yale. Decided to start my own business, and very quickly started my podcast, not thinking it would have anything to do with my business. It was all about getting all of the life skills and tools and tips and tricks and mindset shifts from recovery out to the world. So my podcast is called Fragmented the Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. And now the podcast is the main way that I get clients. So I can see that you want to ask me.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but I am dying to know what happened with the homeless man. So we all want to know.
Yeah. So it's hard to remember all the details because it was traumatic. The whole situation was really traumatic. But I'll start with that. When I said I hit a codependent bottom, I literally fell to my knees. He and I were standing in front of my washer and dryer for some reason. I have no idea what we were talking about. And I literally fell to my knees. And I know that was a trauma response now. I didn't know any of that then. And I remember saying to him, I'm having a flashback. And I meant an emotional flashback. But I don't know how I knew that because I never heard of an emotional flashback. And what I now can see is that moment, the reason my knees buckled was because I had this extreme compulsion. I have got to save this man, and I've got to get rid of him because it's killing me. And
Yeah.
those two forces hit together and made me, fall to my knees. And I don't remember all the details. I do remember I gave him $150 and said, "You gotta go." And he left. And the next day he came back and gave me back 100. He said, "This is way too much money for me," which that tells you something about him, that he
Yeah.
couldn't even accept $150. It was just too much for him.
Yeah.
Then I do remember also, I lived across from the New Haven harbor, and he grew up on the other side of the harbor. So I drove him over there and I left him there. I don't remember how I got him to go. And then I got word from a mutual friend that he was on his way back to my house. And I got in my car and I left, and I went a couple towns away to stay with a friend for the weekend, because I
Yeah.
knew that if he came knocking on the door, that I was going to let him in. And I was like, I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
And what's really wild is a few weeks into my recovery. Now, remember, I met him at church, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had stopped coming to church. So this one day, I don't know how far in the future this was, but it was a few weeks. It was called the deacon on the door. So I was doing the scriptural readings and I was welcoming people at the door. And it was a lovely day. And I was outside the front steps of the door. And he came walking up. And I didn't have that flood of like fear and guilt and shame that I'd had in the past. And I knew that I was different. And I could tell by looking at him that he knew that I was different. And I never saw him again after that. I did get word from that mutual friend that eventually somehow he made his way to Texas, and then eventually that he died. I don't know how, but to this day, he's like, in my mind, he is an angel that was sent to me to help me hit my codependent bottom, get into recovery, and then carry the message of recovery to those who still suffer. Because I wouldn't be a boundaries coach if it were not for him. Like, God only knows. I mean, I would probably be 500 pounds now, and who knows. But I wasn't so much. In the latter years, I did occasionally drink, but I didn't get drunk anymore. Whereas I drank to get drunk until I was in my early 40s. I did smoke weed for a very long time, but now I'm completely like substance free and abstinent from sugar and compulsive eating and all that stuff. So guess what? I feel all my feelings now.
Yeah. And they had we must feel and accordingly. Okay. How did you identify the boundaries? How did you learn to set them and hold people accountable for respecting them, and you respecting other people's boundaries.
That's like 5 questions in one, but
Yeah.
I can tell you the whole story. So really what happened for me, Sherry, is I learned to build boundaries kind of vicariously through the 12 steps of recovery. It's not like someone sat me down and like, okay, Barb, we're going to teach you boundaries. I didn't even know that I was building boundaries at the time. But as I started to have boundaries, I was like, this is amazing. And I think the reason it was so amazing for me is that, codependence being my core wound, boundaries are essentially the antidote to codependence. And so as I got a handle on boundaries and I couldn't believe the difference in my life, I started reading about boundaries. And I would and the books I would read were just like a bunch of words. And I've learned that I'm a pretty visual person. So I would try to draw these visual depictions of like, if this was the physical world, what would that look like? And it helped me the reading and the drawing helped me to retroactively understand what happened to me such that I didn't develop boundaries with trauma, and what happened to me such that I did build boundaries. And those drawings eventually turned into handouts, which turned into a workbook, which is now the backbone of my Unshakable You curriculum, which is my private coaching program. And I did all the things one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one boundary at a time. So what I hear from people often is, I don't know what my boundaries are. Well, part of the process of building boundaries is discovering what's okay with me and what's not okay with me. What do I want? What do I like? What do I need? What do I prefer? Where do I end and other people begin? Where does my responsibility end and where do other people's responsibilities begin? And so there's an experimental process. But because I was such a people-pleasing chameleon, I actually didn't know. I mean, there was some things, of course, I knew that I liked it. Like, I don't like horror movies, never have, never will, right? Yeah. But when I was in my drinking days, I didn't even drink my own drink. So I started drinking beer as a teen because that's what everybody drinks. And then I dated a guy who was really a wine connoisseur, and I learned all about wine, and I drank wine. And then I dated a guy who was a Jack Daniels drinker, and so I drank Jack Daniels and Diet Coke. And then I dated a guy who was a beer connoisseur, and I learned that I like wheat beers. So I didn't even have my own identity in terms of what I drank. And so can you imagine how many other areas of my life I didn't have my own identity? So part of the process of building boundaries is getting to know yourself. It's like, what are the boundaries of Barb? And then expressing that. And I will say, you know, being in a recovery program for food also helped me a lot. First of all, a food plan is a set of boundaries. A budget, like if you have money, you know, a budget is boundaries for money. But when it came to the food, I had to figure out how to talk to people. So I'm a compulsive overeater and sugar addict. And so in the beginning, you know, when people would offer me food or something, I would say, I don't eat sugar. Well, then I would turn into this like research project, and I'm like, do you eat fruit? Do you eat this? And do you eat that? And I realized I don't want to share that kind of information. So what I realized is I was opening the door for them by saying, I don't eat sugar. So then I started saying, I don't eat sweet. And then people were like, oh my God, I don't know how you do it. And so then I would say, oh, I'm in a recovery program for compulsive overeating. And then I also realized way too much information, which by the way was the story of my life. So I landed on, I say, I have food issues. And once I started saying that, nobody asked me any other questions. Because nowadays, it's like food issues. What is that? You're vegan, you're paleo, you have celiac disease, you're dairy intolerant. Like, what is it? You know, so people ask. So and then I also had to learn to be firm with people who feel like it's their job to make me eat stuff. And then I also, now I often bring food with me. I do go to restaurants sometimes. I don't bring food there, but I typically will look at the menu ahead of time and decide ahead of time what I'm going to eat so I can put it into my plan. But when I go to parties and stuff, or if I go to I went to a cookout the other night, and I brought a veggie burger because I don't eat meat at this point in time, which is really just for health purposes. And some people think that's weird, and I don't care at this point because this is my life. But it took me some time, and I had to do a lot of work to do that. But I think, so what happened through that process of getting to know myself better and actually setting boundaries to protect myself and also to contain myself, because a lot of my boundaries were things that I was doing that I think of now metaphorically as I was lobbing bombs into my own life, but didn't know it. I thought they were coming from outside. And so as I learned to build those boundaries, I got to know myself better, but I also stood by my boundaries. And so before recovery, I think I liked myself. I always felt like a powerful woman of agency. I was never like a wallflower, people walking over me. But I can see now that I didn't love myself. I didn't feel worthy. But if you had asked me, do you feel like a worthy person? I would have absolutely said yes. But when I look back at all of my behavior, that was not the behavior of a woman who feels worthy. I know I didn't trust myself. I especially didn't trust myself in the boyfriend picking department. Like I happen to date men. And so every single relationship I ever had was dysfunctional. And I'm now in the first and only healthy relationship. We've been together for 7.5 years. And I attribute that primarily to my boundaries, but to my recovery in general. And so if you want to grow to love someone, getting to know them, and then standing behind them when they set boundaries is a really good way to do that. That's what I did with myself. So I came to love myself. I came to feel worthy. I built trust with myself, one boundary at a time. And so like those are some of the reasons why when I became a coach and realized I needed to have some kind of a niche, that I picked boundaries because they had such a profound effect on my life, because I didn't trust myself and now I do. I didn't love myself and now I do. I didn't feel worthy and now I do. And when I look back, it was essentially the boundary building process that did that. And so one of the words you used when you were asking those questions was respect. Like, how do I get people to respect me and my boundaries, and how do I respect them? And like when I started learning about boundaries, it was pretty clear to me that I didn't have healthy ones and that people were trampling all over my boundaries that I never set. But what I didn't realize for a while was that I trampled all over other people's boundaries all the time too. And I think that's something a lot of my clients don't get until we start doing the work, that if you have poor boundaries yourself, you probably don't respect other people's boundaries. And so as I started to respect myself and see what was happening to me, I couldn't help but see what I was doing to other people. And luckily for me, I was in recovery with other people who would say things like, you know, ouch, or that was not very cool, Barb, or whatever, that, you know, called me on stuff in, you know, in gentle ways. And so when you respect yourself, then you're much more likely to respect your boundaries, and you just exude respect. And I didn't know that I didn't respect myself, Sherry, if you had asked me that. But then when you look at my years of substance use and dysfunctional, like toxic relationships and work environments and all the codependence and the compulsive overeating, like that's not someone who feels a lot of self-respect. People who feel respectful don't abuse and neglect themselves. And so like one of the phrases that you used in asking me those questions was setting boundaries. And the way that I talk about it now, Sherry, is I don't set boundaries. I have them. I used to set them, and then they became internalized, and they're now just a part of who I am. So I don't, like one of my clients, she worked with me for like 1.5 years. And at the end I said, like, what's your kind of go-to right now when, you know, something comes up around boundaries? And she says, I ask myself, is this mine to own? And I said, you know, what's funny? I don't even ever have to ask myself that, because I just know it's mine or it's not mine. It's internalized. And then last year, I think while I was a guest on another podcast, I had this epiphany that, oh my God, building healthy boundaries is about creating a sense of internal safety. And once I had that epiphany, Sherry, it was literally like I had this retroactive understanding of all the work that I've done over the years with boundaries. It's a concept that I've been sort of like swirling around and finally named it, internal safety. And once I named it, I was like, oh, this is what this is about. So when I talk about internal safety, I don't mean you feel calm and firm at all times. What I mean is when the feelings of guilt and shame or worry that someone's going to be upset with you come up, you don't use those feelings to dictate your next move. So often, like guilt and shame are the most common feelings that people feel when they even think about setting boundaries or want to set them. And so, like, what I heard also not too long ago from a therapist is the guilt we feel when setting boundaries is proportional to how much we abandon ourselves. In other words, if you want to stop feeling the guilt and shame, you've got to stop abandoning yourself. So in this context, when I say abandoning yourself, I mean when you feel guilty and you give in to the guilt and you think of it as a command, you've done something wrong and you must take it back. That's abandoning yourself, because when you set a boundary, you are protecting yourself. You're taking care of yourself. And when you give in to the guilt, so internal safety is knowing I've got my own back, even if the feelings come up. So if I feel guilty, if I feel shameful, if I feel anxious, because what's happening inside is we have this discomfort. And I want to take a moment to talk about two different kinds of discomfort. So there's the discomfort of dysfunction, and then there's the discomfort of growth. Discomfort of dysfunction is something that's kind of never ending. You've probably been living with it your whole life, and it's probably going to get worse if you don't change your behavior. The discomfort of growth this is scary because it's new. But if you keep doing it, it will no longer be new, and it will no longer be scary because it will become familiar. So it's finite discomfort. It will end. And on the other side of that is healing and peace and serenity. So like, pick your discomfort. You're going to have one of them, right? So this is the discomfort of growth. And then understanding discomfort does not mean danger. So we're still operating with systems that caused us to go into fight or flight mode because we're in a cave and a saber-toothed tiger just came in. You're not in a cave. It's not a saber-toothed tiger. Someone is upset with you. Huge difference. But your body reacts as your body and your mind react to that. So they are going into this fight or flight mode, and they haven't been updated to the fact that you're an adult. You're probably inside of a house that has like plumbing and heating. It's not a cave. There's no saber-toothed tigers. You get to update your system. And that's what internal safety is all about. And one of the most important ways that you build internal safety is through internal boundaries. So these are boundaries that you're doing inside yourself that no one else knows about. So some of it is things like, when my system gets aflame, I calm myself. Like I put my hand on my chest. I feel my feet on the ground. I get into the present moment. I connect with my senses. I don't power through this feeling of chaos and urgency, because I was taught my whole life, you just deal with whatever comes out with you. There's no resting or whatever.
No.
And then I tell myself things. So these are internal boundaries. I say things like, discomfort does not mean danger. I'm not in trouble here. This is not my problem to solve. These are not my things. These are just examples of things. For me, the most impactful internal boundaries have to do with my thoughts. I was shocked to learn when I got into recovery that I catastrophized about the future, ruminated about the past, blamed and complained constantly. Now, I have always been a very positive, optimistic person. That's still true. And yet all this negative shit was going on in my brain. So once I started to see that, I'm the only one who can stop that stuff. No one else can help me with that. So my internal boundaries were, as soon as I see that, I get to stop it and then do something else. Because your brain, your mind's job is to think. It's not that you can't just stop the thoughts. You get to choose thoughts, right? So I don't think I ruminate at all anymore, but I still occasionally catastrophize. And I would say my catastrophizing went down by like 95% over the years. And the last 2 years, I've really worked a lot harder on my nervous system. And I would say I'm down like 99% less of the catastrophizing because I stop it. And I have this new thing, which actually interestingly came to me from ChatGPT and doing the processing, that I have my elder self tell me, Barb, this is your mind trying to prevent future harm. You're safe right now. I look around, I name 5 things I can see. I touch 2 things and name them. And then I continue to have my elder self say, You've been through things like this before, and it's never been worry that's gotten you through them. It's been being present. And these thoughts you're having, they're not predictions of the future. They're just thoughts. And when I first heard that, which was actually just a matter of months ago, I probably said that to myself 25 times a day. And now it's like once every couple of weeks. It's really astonishing. So internal boundaries are shutting off the stuff. And I'll tell you one thing that I heard in my very early recovery days. I was listening to some recovery podcast, and somebody said the phrase, "This is info, not ammo." And I was like, whoa, what? And they said, when you like, let's say that you do something you're not exactly proud of, instead of beating yourself up and saying, oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. Why did I do that? What is the matter with me? You use it as information, not ammunition. So it's info, not ammo. And this is literally saved me, Sherry, because what I found was, even though I thought I liked myself and I thought about myself as a positive person, I was kind of like scanning the horizon, looking for reasons to beat myself up. So when I learned this info, not ammo, it really changed things for me. And the way I think about it now is that if you want to build a bridge from self-deprecation to self-compassion, the best way to do that bridge is curiosity. And I love curiosity because it's neutral. Well, when you say this is info, not ammo, that's you being curious. You could ask, why am I doing this? A better question is, what could I do differently? So if you're encountering a dynamic, multiple areas in your life, you're the common denominator. And a lot of people will use that as reasons to beat themselves up. But this is info, not ammo. And actually, it's good news. If you're the common denominator, if the behavior is coming from you, the pattern is coming from you, that's a blessing to know that, because you can change you. If everybody else is really the problem, you're screwed. You can't do anything about it. But you can do something about you. And so, now this idea, the info, not ammo, has worked for me for years, but calling it curiosity and building the bridge between self-deprecation and self-compassion, that's all kind of new. And understanding all this work as internal boundaries is really new. And thinking of it as shoring up my internal safety. So internal safety doesn't mean that you never have discomfort. I will say I have way less discomfort than I ever had before. But when I have discomfort, I don't use it as a reason to cave on my boundaries. I do what I need to do to take care of myself. So I know that I have my own back. So you build up the capacity over time to deal with the discomfort, because I've known for a long time, the feelings that come up when either thinking about setting boundaries or after you set a boundary are the reason that people either don't set boundaries or they cave on them. So you have to learn how to manage your feelings. And this is where emotional boundaries come in. Understanding my feelings are mine and they're my responsibility, no one else's. So I don't get to blame other people for making me feel things. And other people's feelings are their responsibility. They're not yours. You can't change them. So if someone gets upset, they get to be upset. And, I think about it like this, Sherry. Let's just say that you and I have been friends for a long time, and I've been overly accommodating to you, and I've been making your life so much easier, and I start building boundaries, and I'm no longer super accommodating to you. Well, you would probably get upset by that, because I've made your life easier for a very long time, and I'm not making your life easier anymore. So it makes total sense that you would get upset. And you get to be upset because that's upsetting. And also you get to be upset because those are your feelings, not mine. But what most of us do is use your upsettedness as an instruction. You have done something wrong and you have to fix it. And that's actually, so having internal safety is understanding I haven't done anything wrong, and it's not my responsibility to fix. Other people's feelings are theirs, and they belong to them. My feelings are mine, and I get to manage my own feelings. And the other thing is our feelings matter, But if you want to live a life of meaning and purpose and depth and authenticity, you can't let your feelings, often that are rooted in the past, rule the present moment. So, when I mentioned before, you're not in a cave with a saber-toothed tiger, you're probably in a house with walls and heating and stuff. But we also often have programming from childhood. So you're not
Yes.
on the playground with the bully. You're not in the household with the parents that don't know how to raise children. You're not in the workplace when you were a teenager and you had a boss that raked you over the coals in front of everybody. You're an adult and your life is not under threat. And so understanding these emotions are coming up not because of the thing that's happening right now. They're coming up because in my body, it's reminding me of the thing that happened years ago. But that's not what's happening. So when I use those feelings that are really based in the past to rule my day-to-day life, I'm not going to be able to have like a really deep, meaningful, purposeful, authentic life unless I start learning how to manage those feelings and start learning how to take care of myself and build this sense of intimacy. So I've said a lot, so I'm going to stop there and let you.
Important to our healing and growth. When I was going through that boundary recognition and setting many of my life time friends not only didn't like they knew me and boundaries, they weren't going to tolerate it and chose to walk out of my life. Now, when I tell people that more of a heads up, they will happen. Allow yourself to send them off in love and light to your many wonderful points. Stand in your power. Recognizing you have not done anything wrong. Embrace the authority, confidence, and self-love that comes from allowing those people to go.
Yeah, agreed. And I never had any confrontations with friends, but I lost friends. And unfortunately, it's sad. But here's how I think about it, Sherry. If I've been a people pleaser my entire life, I need to be surrounded by people who need to be pleased by me. And I want people to approve of me, but I don't need them like with claws the way that I used to. And, I've heard it said it's fine to seek people's approval, but only when you have your own approval first. So what happened for me with my long-term friendships is I realized when I got in recovery, I was doing all the work. Now, on some level, I must have known I was doing that, but I also was really resentful of my friends, and I complained about them to each other, not to the friends that I was upset with. And I got in recovery and I started realizing, wow, it doesn't have to be that way. And part of it was that I was going to recovery meetings every week and then having coffee afterwards. And I started socializing with people and seeing them regularly. And there was a mutuality about our friendships that were developing. And the contrast between that and the long-term friendships where I was the one that was making the phone calls and setting the arrangements and making sure that you're going to be there and that, and saying, oh, it's okay, don't worry that you blew me off for the 15th time. And so I just stopped reaching out to my friends and I stopped seeing them. And I just, I still love them. I still care about them, but I care about me more. And I'm not going to I want to be in friendships with people who want to be in friendships with me as much as I want to be in friendship with them. And here's how I think about that. It's like, I had all these people around me that were coming to me because I needed their approval. And now that they're not in the way anymore, my real people can find me. They can get to me because I'm not blocked by all these people. My time isn't taken up by people that I have to overgive and over accommodate to in order to keep them in my life. And so the kinds of friends that I have now are people that they want to be friends with me about as much as I want to be friends with them. And that's what I want in my friendships. And so I don't have any ill will towards any of those people at all. I'm sure they've found other people that are accommodating them and probably don't miss me because I wasn't going to do that. And it is unfortunate. And then since we're talking about possibly losing people, I think that's another one of the big fears is I'm afraid essentially I'm going to be abandoned by people. And, it might happen. It could, but the rewards are so great. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be painful. And, if you're learning how to process your emotions when it comes to boundaries, you're learning how to process all your emotions and you'll learn how to manage the grief that can come up. And then, one other kind of myth about boundaries is that people think that they're walls. And okay, like 0.0001% of boundaries might be walls. So like if you have a violent person in your life and you get a restraining order against them, that's a wall. You need a wall from that person. Right? That's just a minute percentage of boundaries. But boundaries actually make us closer to people. And that's because you are now being honest with them about what's okay and not okay. And you can't have an authentic relationship with someone when you're lying to them about this is fine, I don't mind, when you really do. And you also, as you get to know yourself and you start protecting yourself with this sense of internal safety, you start to feel more okay about being vulnerable. And you start to have better discernment powers about who to be vulnerable with. And you can't have intimate relationships without a level of vulnerability. And it's hard to actually have intimate relationships when you're inauthentic with people. So that's why, having healthy boundaries brings you closer to people, unless they're not really your people. And then, but it could be the case that you have a confrontation with people. But for most normal people, it's not going to be.
Vậy and that is what I have come to embody and really just that is a beautiful gift to ourselves to live authentically without guilt or self-depreciation. What would you like to impart on people who are going to hear this conversation?
I think what I'd like to impart is that you can't create internal safety by focusing externally. So if you're anything like I was, you are constantly focused on the outside world. What does he need? What does she need? What do they need? What does the organization need? What does the cause need? Usually to the complete neglect of ourselves. Well, you can't create this internal safety when you're focused out there. So the focus needs to become internal, and it's not selfish. It's self-preservation.
Thank you for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to explore your own healing journey or intuitive gifts, I'd love to work with you. I offer psychic medium readings, energy healing sessions, and intuitive development guidance at shariroberts.org. And if you're not quite ready for a session, but want to be a part of the conversation in a supportive community, join my private Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. This is Shari Lee Roberts. Until next time, remember, you're never alone.